Brothers and sisters, it is time to fight. Welcome to Strange Days, Here We Come. I'm your host, the Pop Mythologist. Happy Halloween! The quote that opened today's episode is from the 1990 film Nightbreed, one of my personal favorite horror films, written and directed by someone who's also one of my favorite horror creators, Clive Barker. And it will be one of two horror films we'll be discussing today, the other one being 2018's A Quiet Place. We wanted to do this horror double feature partly as a way to celebrate Halloween, but also because horror, much like science fiction, has always been a genre with a lot of social commentary. And a big part of this podcast, of course, is examining certain kinds of societal issues through the lens of pop culture. And certainly there's no shortage of real-life horror in the real world today, making these films timely and relevant. I'm also really excited because I have a special guest with me today who will be co-hosting. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you might have heard me sometimes mention a metal band or artist, and that's because, I love metal music. I'm not an expert on it or anything, but I do love it. And today I have someone with me who is an expert, and that's because he is himself a metal musician. His name is Sapient, and he is the one-man visionary behind the blackened death metal band Abomnium. To save time, and so we can talk more about the movies, I won't go into the whole story of how I met Sapient and first came to collaborate with him, but suffice it to say that we are friends. And in fact, over the years, he has on occasion contributed to Pop Mythology, the pop culture blog that this podcast is a part of, usually writing about metal or horror fiction appropriately enough. So, Sapient, welcome to the podcast.
How lovely of you to invite me. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yes, thank you for coming on. Obviously, I just told the audience that you're a musical artist, but can you take a moment to properly introduce yourself in a bit more detail in any way that you feel like doing?
That's probably a good way of introducing me. I mean, I've been playing guitar now for a very long time. I think I worked out it was 37 years. And I have two active bands, Abomnium, which is the metal band you mentioned, and then this very sort of spacey alternative band called Bridge 11, where I collaborate with my friend and neighbour from 2 doors down, a wonderful singer called Gordon. And we write songs about science and space. So I think the thing that connects them is a love of science and a love of space and just how horrific space is as well. Frightens the life out of me. When you start thinking about it, it's terrifying. So that's probably a good segue into talking about horror, because I think space is horrific in a good way.
Absolutely. It is the source of one of the horror in one of the films that we'll be talking about today, in fact. So metal and horror, of course, have long shared a symbiotic relationship with a lot of cross-fertilization between the two. I mean, like going all the way back to Black Sabbath, they took the very name of their band from a horror film by Mario Bava. And of course, like Alice Cooper derived a lot of his theatrics from horror. And the very first metal album that I was introduced to, in fact, was Among the Living by Anthrax. And like literally half the songs on that album were inspired by Stephen King novels.
Yeah.
And then you have, of course, like vampire metal, which is an entire subgenre or sub-subgenre. And of course, this tradition continues with contemporary bands such as Cannibal Corpse. And then the inspiration flows the other way, too. So, for example, I mentioned Anthrax, but Stephen King himself has also said that he often listens to bands such as Anthrax or Slayer while he's writing. I mean, that was from an interview in his younger years, so I don't know if he still does that, but anyway, the point still stands. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, what is it about horror that you like so much?
It's the fact that it's really, really unnerving. I think the whole point of horror is to put you in a place of discomfort and not necessarily give you a let out either. And I think that's a really nice sort of escape from everyday life, just being put in a place where things on the screen or on the page are much worse than you have it in your daily life. And I think in some ways that's good for you. Because I think being put in that place. I mean, it's a little bit like you think about children and their amazing imagination. I think as adults we need sometimes to have our imagination sparked. If you watch children, one of the things they love is being terrified by things. You know, the clown or playing hide and seek or peekaboo. It's that same thing. It's being put in that place of discomfort so that when you come back to reality and realise that there is a lot of comfort to be found, even in the worst situations, there's always something that you can cling to. I think that's the power of horror. And I think you're absolutely right about metal. As you was talking, I was trying to think of a metal album that didn't have anything to do with horror. Probably Animals as Leaders or Dragon Force or something cheery like that, but the rest of it does.
Yeah, and so that leads me to my next question, which is, does horror, or has it ever inspired your own music?
Completely. I love the fact that there's a website called the Metal Archives, and it's basically Wikipedia for metal bands. And if you go and look at the Abomnium page, all this is created by someone else. I don't know who did it, but whoever created the page for Abomnium, decided that the themes for Abomnium were religion, science fiction, and mind control. And it was like, I couldn't have summed that up better. So much of what I like to explore lyrically is uncomfortable, whether it's sort of in the farthest reaches of space or within the confines of a religious order that is inescapable because of its tenets and codices. I find that fascinating. I maybe should add that the lyrics always come last and they're very much stream of consciousness. So there's something probably interesting in there for someone on a couch to talk to me about. But yeah, huge inspiration. And I'm a massive Anthrax fan as well. And I love Stephen King, and I think their crossovers are amazing.
Yeah, completely. So yeah, thank you for that answer. So maybe we can start talking about these movies. Here's my usual spoiler warning to the audience. There will be spoilers for both Nightbreed and A Quiet Place. Before we get to the discussion of the films themselves, I just briefly wanted to share with the audience why I chose these two films to start with. And Sapient, I appreciate your openness in letting me choose these films this time around. If you enjoy this and would be willing to come back on, next time you can totally choose which films or film we talk about.
All right. Rob Zombie films.
I wonder if I'm going to regret that, but no, I'm sure I won't. You have excellent taste. So one reason I chose these two films is that I didn't want either of them to be one of the more obvious dystopian/horror films like The Purge or Videodrome or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, for example. I wanted to pick ones that aren't typically thought of as dystopian and offer some unique commentary on them. With A Quiet Place, it's obviously post-apocalyptic, and there's definitely some overlap between the post-apocalyptic and dystopian genres. But with Nightbreed in particular, I've never heard anyone describe it as dystopian. And I want to make a case for why it is dystopian, at least for the eponymous Nightbreed who are portrayed in the film. For them, it is a dystopian world. And that's what I often like to say about dystopian fiction in general, in that even though a lot of it is sci-fi or sometimes horror, and it might take place in the future, it's not really just about the future. It's often more about what's happening now, especially for vulnerable populations who are in many ways already living in a dystopia. But dressing it up in the outward clothing of science fiction or horror often makes it more palatable or more entertaining and often safer for the artist and creator. And we can talk more about what we mean by safer when we get to The Quiet Place a bit later. But anyway, taken together, I think that these films are quite relevant to the themes of dystopia, authoritarianism, and even all-out fascism, as well as surviving and fighting back in various ways. So that was the rationale, and I thought we could start by talking about Nightbreed first. So Sapien, I'll go ahead and first introduce the film, then I'll ask you for your opening thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
As mentioned, Nightbreed was written and directed by Clive Barker, based on his own novel, Cabal. It was released in 1990 and stars Craig Sheffer as a man named Boone, who finds himself having dreams about a mysterious place called Midian, which he goes out in search of. And it co-stars Anne Bobby as his girlfriend Laurie, who goes on an equally epic journey to go find him when he goes missing, kind of like Orpheus descending into the underworld to find Eurydice. The film features quite a stellar crew, with an orchestral score composed by none other than Danny Elfman, and some of the art and design done by Ralph McQuarrie of Star Wars fame. And this is one of 3 films that Clive Barker wrote and directed, the others being the original Hellraiser in 1988 and Lord of Illusions in 1995. All 3 films, in my opinion, are really good, which is remarkable because we all know that novelists don't necessarily make for good filmmakers. Like one of the most famous examples of this being Maximum Overdrive by Stephen King, who later admitted he didn't know what he was doing and he was on cocaine the entire time. So when a novelist does make multiple films and they're all good, I think that's really impressive. Like the only other example of that I can think of is Michael Crichton, obviously of Jurassic Park fame, who wrote and directed a number of good films as well. But I can't help but wish that Clive had made more films. Like he did write a few of the screenplays and produce some movies such as The Midnight Meat Train. But he never did the writer-director thing again after Lord of Illusions. And while doing some research for this episode, I saw an old interview where he talked about the reasons. Part of it is ultimately that he just identifies as a novelist and a painter more than a filmmaker. But another reason is that he got tired of studios interfering with his creative visions. And in point of fact, that is what happened with Nightbreed. They interfered quite a bit and changed Barker's unique vision of the film to make it more like a slasher because they couldn't understand what he was trying to do. So the film got released as what is now known as the theatrical cut, which at the time I still thought was pretty good, but not nearly as good as the director's cut, which restores Clive's vision and finally got released in 2014 after over 20 years of fans demanding it. And there's even a message from Clive Barker at the end of the director's cut, thanking all the fans for making this possible after all those years. And so it is this version, the director's cut, that we'll be discussing mostly today. So that's my intro for the film, and now, Sapient, I'll start by asking, have you ever read any of Clive Barker's fiction before or seen any of his films?
Yes.
Besides this one?
Yes. So I've seen Candyman. I'm pretty sure I've seen Midnight Meat Train because I think that's the one with Vinnie Jones in it.
Yes, Vinnie Jones was in Midnight Meat Train,
yes.
And Bradley Cooper.
A truly frightening individual, Mr. Jones is.
Yeah, but as it turns out, well, I don't want to give any spoilers for Midnight Meat Train, but he's just the beginning.
Oh, yes. And Candyman. Candyman's really good fun. Haven't seen the recent remake, but I've seen the original. I'd never seen Nightbreed before, but I have read a lot of Clive Barker's fiction. I rate him extremely highly. Imagica, Weave World, these stories are ones that somehow the imagery just gets stuck in your head. There's no one else quite like him for imagining strange stuff, I think.
Exactly. I think that's a great way of putting it. In fact, when started in middle school when I was watching a lot of horror films, but I started reading more horror fiction in high school. And by then I was like a huge Stephen King and Anne Rice fan. And I couldn't quite get into Clive Barker at first back then, even though I wanted to, because Stephen King made this famous statement about Clive Barker being the future of horror and all that. And at the time, I just thought, like, this is a little too weird for me. But then as I got older, I started loving it for precisely that reason. Like you said, there's nobody else quite with his unique imagination. It's like he understands the beauty of weird.
And it's slightly placeless as well, which is the other thing I love about Clive Barker. When you compare him to Stephen King is someone, and my wife and I are both big fans of Stephen King. Whenever he has a new book out, we're buying hardbacks. We just lap them up. He taught us about America. He writes about local communities in a way that's almost like, I don't know, Garrison Keillor or something. You know, if you took away the spookiness, if you took away the murders, he would write about small town America in a way that makes you feel connected to it, and in a way that you don't see anywhere else unless you actually travel to small town America. Clive Barker, on the other hand, yes, he has bits of London and bits of places in the US, and I think Nightbreed was supposed to be in Canada, but goodness me, it doesn't really matter where he sets them.
Yeah.
Because they're very, very colourful. Yes.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that Garrison Keillor reference. You know, for a European, you have you have your finger on the pulse of Americana.
I remember the educated bit of the BBC, BBC Radio 4, used to do sort of audio books, late night audio books. And when I was quite young, got hooked for a little while on listening to Garrison Keillor reading bits out of Lake Wobegon days right at the end of the day. So that's where I know it from.
Oh, excellent. So what were your overall thoughts on Nightbreed to start with?
Well, this might be a bit of a hot take, because I thought it was equally thematically brilliant and hilariously bad. The design, the themes, the music, obviously, some of the shot selection, some of the art direction. You said we can mention spoilers really early on where Decker kills the woman in the kitchen. I mean, classic horror setup. Really nicely done. But goodness me, what was the screenplay? What did the read-through for that script look like? Where was the character development? And it's harsh because I'm judging it, I suppose, with a view to the way modern films are made. In terms of the way that people speak and move and act. But I mean, I remember being very impressed by Alien the first time I saw it. And Alien, if you think back to one of the first scenes where the entire crew of the Nostromo is round the table having breakfast or a meal just before the chestburster first appears. And they're all talking over each other. And I'd never seen that in a film before. It felt natural. It felt like it actually felt like a group of people, and there was just happened to be a camera in the room. Whereas Nightbreed felt very, very mannered, a little awkward. I kept wondering why people kept yelling Boone and what his first name was. And yet it's insanely watchable. And I think when you hit your thesis about really it all being about a reversal of who the monsters are and why it represents a lot that's relevant to us today, I'm going to just agree with you utterly.
Well, I actually thought that was a great summation. So I am biased because, as mentioned, I do love this film a lot. And not because it is a masterpiece, by no means. It is definitely objectively not on the level of something like Alien, as you just mentioned, The Exorcist, Rosemary's Baby, and many other timeless horror films from, like the 70s or the 80s. And somehow they just capture this feeling of timelessness. It doesn't come across as awkward or dated. And this one does, although in fairness, in not a very different way than a lot of horror films from the late 80s or early 90s do. There is a very 1990 feel to it, and there is some awkwardness, and totally acknowledge that for sure. I just think, it's personal for me, where even the theatrical cut, I liked it, even though, if you notice the aesthetic limitations of this one, you're going to hate the theatrical cut. But even that one I liked because back when I saw it, and I was really young, I was like a kid, it felt like a horror version of the X-Men. And
that makes sense.
Yeah, and as a huge fan of the X-Men, I just really immediately took to it. And then I just kept rewatching it over the years. When I finally got the director's cut, it just made it so much better from a mythical perspective. I think that's there are two really big reasons why I love this film. And one is I love stories that consciously clothe themselves in mythical garments. Like the opening shots in this film, and we know opening shots are really important. We open with what appear to be cave paintings of the Nightbreed and their history. So right away, the film is framing itself in a mythical way, because what's more mythical than ancestral cave paintings, right? But there's more. After the cave paintings, we go immediately to Boone's dreams. And if we're using a Freudian lens, then you could say the monsters in those dreams literally represent the monster lurking in his unconscious. But I prefer the Jungian lens, in which these dreams contain the wisdom of the unconscious, and it's spurring him towards his path of individuation. Or if we're using Joseph Campbellian framing, then it's the call to adventure. So it's very mythical, but the other reason is that it's very political, I think more than it gets credit for, which we'll talk about in just a bit. And I want to stress that it's really the director's cut that I love so much, partly because, and apparently there's a Cabal cut, something called the Cabal cut out there that's sort of like a fan-made version that Clive Barker eventually gave his blessings for. but it's really hard to find, and I haven't seen it, so I can't comment on it. But another reason I love the director's cut is that it restores the centrality of the character of Laurie, played by Anne Bobby, so Boone's girlfriend, who I would argue she's even more important to the narrative and the message of the film in some ways than Boone. But at the time, speaking of studio interference, they didn't really know what to make of this. Here was this interesting, strong-willed, compassionate female character that Clive Barker created, and they just relegated her to the sidelines in the theatrical cut, like vastly reduced her screen time, and it removes a lot of the real message, I think, and the beauty of the film. So anyway, those are some of my opening comments.
Yeah, I could imagine that being a shame. I mean, I've only seen the director's cut now, but if you really cut out a lot of what she did, she'd be relegated to the sort of classic B-movie screamer, I think, which would be a real shame because, in a way, she's the protagonist.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Because she's the one that we see. It's really Midian we see her eyes through, not Boone.
Yes.
In the end, and she wants to join them.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of it at the end. I mean, I think it's done a bit schlockily. but big swells of Danny Elfman strings and a lot of sort of Laurie, but never mind. The story, the heart of the story, I think, is what we should really focus on, not necessarily the aesthetic. And I think she's the heart of it. She's the heart of the film.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that because, I feel exactly that way. I mean, it's almost like Boone is, in Barker's version, this decoy protagonist, right? It starts with them, like the usual, Barker understands Hollywood. They're like, okay, they want a male protagonist. I'll give them
with
that.
Nice hair.
Yeah, leather jacket. It starts with that, but then, it kind of sneakily shifts where the audience is learning about and seeing Midian through Laurie's eyes. And that's partly the whole point. Because what's interesting is for Boone, it's not really a choice, if you think about it, to become Nightbreed. I mean, sure, he has those dreams and he seeks them out. But then he gets bitten, which I don't think he wanted. And so then it's like, okay, I'm turning into Nightbreed. Might as well accept it. He has no choice, essentially. But it's Laurie who is the one who, at first it's out of love for him. But then once she learns about the Nightbreed, and, it could be totally understandable to be afraid at first. It's different. It's unfamiliar. But she takes the time and makes the effort to learn about them, despite whatever initial fear or discomfort. And then over the course of learning about their history, just learning who they are, and these are just people, they're just people. And starts out wanting to protect them, but then eventually, like you just said, wants to join them by choice. Not because she's bitten, she chooses, I'm leaving the ordinary world behind. Again, Joseph Campbellian terms, and I am going to willingly join this world. And so, I love that you said that because, that's how I feel too. Yeah.
I did think about turning up to this or practicing to turn up to this podcast to just speak in David Cronenberg's Decker voice. I think that would have been quite funny if I could have pulled it off. But because he's quite a character, isn't he?
Quite. So, maybe actually this might be a good place to transition to one of the major themes I was hoping to talk about, which is authoritarianism and also specifically fascism. These two terms are often used interchangeably, but I think it's important to be as precise as we can with terminology and concepts. And authoritarianism is obviously the broader concept, and no single ideology owns authoritarianism. And we know that any ideology can potentially display authoritarian behavior. And even ideologies that purport to be anti-authoritarian can ironically sometimes also display authoritarian tendencies or micro-authoritarian tendencies. But fascism, even though it's authoritarian, it's a specific, coherent ideology. And in Nightbreed, we see that. We see both, actually, but we see fascism very deliberately, I think, by Clive Barker. And one of those ways, there's a number of ways, but one of those ways is, I think, represented by Dr. Decker, whom you just mentioned, in a number of ways. And we must just pause to acknowledge that Dr. Decker is played by none other than master horror filmmaker David Cronenberg. And earlier I mentioned that, novelists like Stephen King don't always make the best directors. Well, as much of a master director Cronenberg is, he's not the best actor. But he does do,
unless it's all a mask, and that's how he talks. It's just decided to be completely flat and emotionless for the entire film. But no, I agree with you.
But it's kind of effectively creepy in that monotone sort of way. It's like, Boone, as your doctor, I think you need to come into my office for treatment.
Yeah, never raises his voice above that for the entire 2 hours.
Yeah, it's like effectively creepy. But there are a number of fascist components. But he, the doctor, is literally a serial killer. You mentioned that, one scene early on. So he is a killer, but then he keeps saying to people that Boone is the murderer, that he needs to be captured and brought to justice. And then, of course, he keeps trying to gaslight Boone, say like, Boone, you're very disturbed. And so it's like, I feel like there are many historical and real life examples of that where, you have certain authority figures who are the ones doing harm, but then they try to scapegoat someone else to essentially distract people from their own wrongdoings and channel people's outrage towards a different target. Like, oh, I don't know, maybe here's a random example. Maybe like people who are pedophiles or protecting pedophiles, but then publicly they moralize about who the bad people are and who should be allowed which rights. This is definitely not a reference to anything happening in real life at all in the US.
Not at all. Or in the UK.
Yeah. So that was one way that I felt like you had this sort of authority figure who is doing wrong, but then tries to, shift the blame.
But not only that, he also manages to co-opt the apparatus of the state.
Right.
So he manages to twist two police forces round his little finger.
Right.
And I spoke about character development early on. I mean, I did wonder at what point Hugh Quashie's character in real life would have gone, hang on a second, why is this doctor always hanging around dead people? Why do people die wherever he goes? Is it really Boone? But never mind. So yeah, were they representing Calgary PD? I think they were originally from Calgary, wasn't it? And then the good old boys of Sheerneck, they were, I don't know, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, something like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, even before those groups
That was really interesting. Yeah.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
But Decker co-opts them.
Yeah, exactly.
And even though the Sheerneck police chief despises Decker, he can tell there's something up with this man right from the get-go. He still gets pulled along into it.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that represents the fusion between the state and institutions that we also see in fascism. So Decker, representing like institution of science, medicine, and then you have like the police and the police chief, whom you mentioned. So there's that fusion of state and institution and fusion of state and church. So the police chief famously,
Ashbury, of course, yeah.
Yeah, but the police chief has that line like, we're going to go out and get those freaks, and we're going out there with God on our side.
And then happens to have a priest hanging around in the cells that you can co-opt into it. Yeah. Yeah.
And then of course, so speaking of like going out and getting those freaks, you have the overt persecution and demonizing of a group of people, which is also a very prevalent component of fascism, which, distinguishes it from just sort of like a more generic authoritarianism, if you will.
And remind me, outside of Decker's dream, the Nightbreed weren't doing anything, in quotes, bad at all, were they?
Definitely not. You mean Boone's dream? Yeah.
Yeah, outside of Boone's dream at the beginning. They were just hanging out in their graveyard, minding their own business completely until people started annoying them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And even that dream, they were just kind of like, I don't know, sort of scaring him, I guess, in a playful way. But yeah, no, all they're doing is just trying to live their lives, minding their own business, want to be left alone. That's it. And they want to be left alone for good reasons because, like I said, there's a number of like explicit allusions and references to fascism where there's a historical flashback of the Nightbreed being persecuted throughout history. And there's some disturbing scenes of Nightbreed being tortured and killed by men in hooded white robes. That is no accident, I think.
No. I think we all know what's going on there.
Yeah. And so obviously they have good reason to be afraid. And so they just want to be left alone. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. they don't really do anything until they're literally attacked. And then in that case, it just becomes self-defense. And then you also have the celebration of like militarized violence, right? When the police and the townspeople are arming themselves to go hunt down the Nightbreed, and they're a little too excited about it, and in the way they fetishize the guns. It is almost like, oh my God, it's hard to believe it's a 1990. I mean, obviously these things have always existed, but it feels so today in some ways that it's interesting that it's just a 1990 film all the way back then.
Well, yeah, and one of the modern themes, of course, is militarization of police in the US. And there's the sort of 45-second scene with the police armourer who's getting all drooly over the kit that he's got in the armoury and handing out favoured pieces to members of the gang. And the last thing he brings up is a garrote. And you think, what on earth are the police doing with a garrote?
Exactly.
And he would not have been out of place in a film about, I don't know, Germany in about 1938.
Yeah, and the reason this feels so prescient in some ways is, people talk about the militarization of the police now, but I think 1990 wasn't really talked about as much. And so seeing that scene in the armory, oh my gosh, it's remarkable. And then, of course, the police chief himself, I think it's no accident that his name is Eigerman, and you say it kind of fast, sort of sounds like Eichmann. Obviously referencing the infamous Adolf Eichmann. And then he has in his office this giant self-portrait of himself in black and white, and it looks very SS. I mean... Yeah. So, yeah, I think all throughout the film, Clive Barker very consciously and deliberately inserts a lot of direct references specifically to, it's not just authoritarianism, this is specifically fascist ideology or certain components of fascist ideology. So it's really, really interesting.
There was one character in there I didn't get. It's maybe not relevant to the thesis that we're exploring, but the guy with keys tied to his hat who kept lots of stuffed animals. Was there something going on there?
Oh, wait, which guy?
The Decker goes and quizzes him. And says, who's up in Midian? And he just looks horrified. And he says, well, they're just dead people, sir.
Do you mean, I think the relevance of that minor character was just that he was someone sympathetic to the Nightbreed.
Yeah,
and
he wasn't he? And trying to protect them. So he was someone on the outside who was trying to protect them, who knew where they were and was trying to deflect. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so it's not just Laurie, but what's interesting about that guy, even though he is a very minor character, is stereotypically, on the surface, he would sort of look like he would belong with the people who are going out to hunt down the Nightbreed, but he ends up being someone who is trying to protect the Nightbreed, an ally. Yeah. And so, I forgot about that guy. Thanks for bringing him up. And maybe it'd be good to also mention, Clive Barker himself is a gay man. And at the time when he first hit the scene as a writer in the 80s, it was a bigger deal than it would be now. So it's understandable that he didn't actually come out until the 90s, by which time he was already a successful and best-selling author. But ever since then, ever since coming out, he's been very outspoken and vocal about it. And there does seem to be this kind of obvious link between the Nightbreed as a marginalized, oppressed community and LGBTQ plus rights, which Barker has very strong views about. Just one quick example, again, while doing some research for this episode, there's this interview that I found from 2015 in Nightmare magazine where the interviewer asks him, quote, "In your lifetime, hasn't there been tremendous progress in terms of gay rights and politics?" End quote. And Barker says, quote, "No, not enough. There's people beating and killing us every week," end quote. And even though I don't think he's explicitly said it in interviews, there is this kind of pretty clear connection between Midian and the Nightbreed and in the LGBTQ community as one example, but obviously Nightbreed can stand in for any oppressed or marginalized community. Because there's even that one scene where Eigerman says, quote, "Whether it's commies, freaks, or third world Y chromosome mutants, we're there. We, the sons of the free."
Yes. No, I think that's right. You can read it in whichever way you want, but the background's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then kind of a bit more maybe on a mythical or spiritual side, the film is also very much about transformation, I think. And there's this little detail that I just love, and I didn't even like the first couple times I saw it, like many years ago, when I was really young, I don't even remember noticing it. But when I rewatched it for this episode, it was like, boom, like just right there. So obvious. But Laurie, for the second half of the film, wears a butterfly brooch on her sweater, which I love because it's subtle. Like the camera doesn't zoom in or linger on it. It's just a background detail you could miss, but it's there. And I love it because butterflies are obviously a symbol of transformation, but there are multiple transformations in the film. There's obviously Boone and Laurie's personal transformation, but also like transformation in the way you go about survival if you're vulnerable or a marginalized community. So like the Nightbreed, for much of the film, but also historically in the film's lore, hide in Midian. Like Midian is their safe place. And it's understandable why they hide because they're actively persecuted. But there's a transformation from hiding phase to fighting phase. And in fact, I think like in my personal philosophy, there's not always a clear dichotomy between fighting and hiding. Because if hiding is for survival, then sometimes hiding can be a kind of fighting in the sense that you have to survive to be able to fight, whatever fight might mean for you, but you have to survive first. And you can't blame vulnerable people for hiding. Like you wouldn't, for example, with things that are going on in the US now, you can't blame like immigrants or migrants for hiding right now. You're not going to expect them to be hitting the streets and joining the protests that are going on, for example, because they're targets, they're vulnerable, or like trans folks, for example, that are being targeted. You wouldn't blame them for maybe feeling like they kind of want to just be quiet for a while and lay low. So I think there's a place and a time for hiding as a means of survival. And we'll also talk more about that when we get to A Quiet Place. But they transform from that phase to a kind of active fighting phase, right? When they're attacked. So that's kind of interesting. And the last thing is the butterfly also symbolizes migration that we don't see yet, but the film ends on it, right? So Midian collapses essentially due to external threat. And so now they have to go migrate to another Midian or find another Midian. And then butterflies represent that too. So I just felt like that little detail was so lovely. I just love it.
That is a really good spot. I hadn't noticed that. I was trying to work out if there was some symbolism to the red scarf tied around her neck at one point.
I didn't notice that. A red scarf?
But yeah, she went around for a chunk of the film with a red scarf tied around her neck, so there's probably something in there.
There's probably something in there,
But the butterfly is great. I tell you one piece of symbolism that is sort of connected to that, but the fact that they worship Baphomet. And Baphomet is so I did a bit of reading because I was like, well, why Baphomet? Who knows whether this is deliberate, but Baphomet, the traditional image of Baphomet is associated with the Rider-Waite tarot card of the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And the devil is, if I get my tarot right, is about being trapped by negative habits or unhealthy attachments or a feeling of insecurity. But ultimately, it's about confronting what's within you and changing patterns and breaking free.
Lovely. I love that. Thank you.
And that must be deliberate.
I'm sure, because with everything else that we've been talking about that it seems like Barker deliberately put in. I mean, he's a smart guy, very, very, very creative and intelligent, consummate artist. I think most of the stuff we've been talking about has been deliberate.
I mean, he's probably a bit more deliberate than Abomnium is, because lyric writing, I often trawl wiki pages for Sumerian and Babylonian theology and steal the names of gods and things. He probably didn't do that.
But I love that read, though, on the kind of the change required, because it's not just referring to the Nightbreed or to Laurie and Boone. It's a sort of a call to people, because, again, the reason why Barker has the audience discover and experience Midian largely through Laurie's eyes is he's sort of, I think, calling on people to be like, don't fall for the propaganda and the brainwashing that makes you fear difference and tries to channel your what's often legitimate outrage onto the incorrect target. Like learn about people that you're told to be afraid of, see that they're just people, that they're not quote unquote monsters. And in fact, the real monsters are often the ones that are trying to distract your attention, say those over there are the monsters, but they're actually the monsters, right? So like Eigerman, obviously, and Dr. Decker being a big one. I mean, I think the fact that his office is aligned with masks is very symbolic as well. Like masks can be good. Like I love anthropology. I love rituals. I love tradition. So like masks can be very powerful positively, but they can also be bad too, obviously, right? So you're sort of like deceiving people, or, you know, he has like different masks for like different occasions in his office. I mean, where's that one main one for when he's literally killing people?
Makes him look like the 10th member of Slipknot.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, hilarious. I love that. But yeah, he has all these different masks. Like he'll wear the one that suits him in the moment. So like when he's going to the police and trying to convince them like, oh, why they have to bring in Boone. He's being the scientific authority, you know. And when he's gaslighting Boone, he's being the compassionate doctor. But I love that read on Bafflement and the Tarot. Did you want to make any last notes before we shift? Well, actually, I almost forgot. I did kind of want to mention, for anyone who's a fan of Nightbreed, who might also be a fan of metal music, if you don't already know about it, there's an album out there that was actually inspired by Nightbreed called Midian, appropriately enough, and it's by the band Cradle of Filth, whom I know are a polarizing band in the metal community, but I myself have never been a purist. I love fusion, and I'm personally a big fan of Cradle of Filth. And Midian is actually one of my favorite albums of theirs. Have you ever listened to it, Sapient?
I don't think I've ever listened to Cradle of Filth.
Ever? Okay.
Talk about them being polarizing.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't listened to them, actually, at least it sounds like you don't actively hate them.
No, but hey, there's so much to choose from. I'm not trying to bring any negativity here. I just literally haven't spent time listening to Cradle of Filth, but I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, and there are so many great bands out there, obviously, of every genre, even just metal now. You know, when I was a kid, it's like, oh, you could sort of, you know, keep track of all the major ones, but now it's just like, there's so many good bands out there. It's like, how can you keep track? Anyway, so Midian, yeah, they even have the actor Doug Bradley, who plays the leader of the Nightbreed, but more famously plays Pinhead in Hellraiser, another great film. And they have him provide narration on some of the songs. And a couple of the tracks are directly about Midian and the Nightbreed. Like there's an opening track, At the Gates of Midian, and then there's a closing track, Tortured Soul Asylum. And then I saw an interview with Danny Filth, the vocalist and lyricist, where he said that the other songs were more about his imagination of members of Midian, like what the different people of Midian might be. But I actually thought, like, I was reading the lyrics of a couple of them, and they seemed to me to refer to specific characters in Nightbreed. Like, there's one song that mentions like a woman. God, I can't wait. Let me pull up the track list.
Her Ghost in the Fog.
Yes. Great guess for someone who hasn't listened to it.
I've got the wiki page up in front of me. I'm cheating.
Yeah, okay. Well, I do too now. But there's the character. What was her name? Rachel. She has that ability to turn into fog or smoke and like pass through walls. And it seemed to me to refer to that. And apparently it's not, because he said he's just imagining other characters. And there's a song called Saffron's Curse where the lyrics refer to like cursed skin. And that made me think of, there's a character who has like porcupine skin. I think her name was Shuna Sasi. So anyway, that's out there for people who might be interested. It just falls into what we mentioned earlier, that grand overarching tradition of horror and metal endlessly inspiring each other. But yeah, any closing thoughts on Nightbreed before we transition to A Quiet Place?
It's definitely worth a watch. I was surprised by it. I still maintain that its aesthetic and its character development is somewhat off.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those where if you stand back and think about it, as we've done for the last few minutes, there's a lot to take in. So, yeah, a good one.
Yeah, fair assessment. And I guess I would just close with, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the themes, but aesthetically and technically, even though you've pointed out some very legitimate flaws, it's also ambitious in a very kind of impressive way, where the design of Midian, for example.
I'm going to say Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, exactly. And the set design and, of course, the remarkable diversity of the residents of Midian. I mean, Clive Barker has always been great at that kind of unique character design and the makeup. And again, of course, the crew of like Danny Elfman, Ralph McQuarrie. I mean, I think they lucked out with Danny Elfman. As huge as Elfman is now, like, I doubt he'd write the score for like a film that's not like a blockbuster Hollywood film. But at the time, he had just done the first Tim Burton Batman movie. So he had caught some attention for that. Like, oh, I didn't know Danny Elfman could write a film score. But he wasn't quite mega, super big yet. So I think they kind of lucked out with him. But it's a great score too.
Yeah, it is a great score. A lot of it, I would say. I mean, who am I to give an opinion on this? Because he's fantastic. A lot of it you don't notice, which I think is a sign of a good score. There were one or two moments where I thought, if I close my eyes and open them again, am I going to see Johnny Depp on screen?
Yes.
It was just too Danny Elfman, Tim Burton.
Yes.
And I think anyone who knows his music will know what I mean by that. It's just that there is something about that sound. But
yes.
It worked overall, I think, and was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, 100%. There is that, like, if I open my eyes, am I going to see Michael Keaton as Batman?
Or Helena Bonham Carter is the other one who would be there.
Yeah. But it does make effective use of, like, the children's choir. I feel like, children's choirs can be, like, ethereal or creepy, and he manages to make them both in this film, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so that was Nightbreed. Now let's move to A Quiet Place. And so I'll just briefly introduce this film. A Quiet Place was released in 2018, written by Brian Woods and Scott Beck, who are a filmmaking team who have actually written and directed a number of horror films together, and also co-written by John Krasinski, and also directed by John Krasinski. Can I pronounce his last name? John Krasinski. And the whole cast in this is basically just the one family, the Abbotts. So we have John Krasinski as Lee Abbott, the father and husband, Emily Blunt as his wife, Evelyn Abbott, real-life couple, married in real life. And I sort of feel like some of that real-life chemistry shows to the film's benefit. My favorite character, Millicent Simmons as Regan Abbott, Noah Jupe as her brother, Marcus Abbott. And then that's basically the family for most of the movie, other than the youngest child, who obviously dies very early in that jarring scene. And the new member of the family, the baby, who comes at the end. But I wanted to talk about this one together with Nightbreed because I feel like these two films complement each other very well in terms of the themes of specifically fascism and oppression, hiding, survival, and resistance, but resistance being precarious when you're being targeted or if you're vulnerable. And again, like this, it's not really interpreted that way usually. So I was curious and I looked it up and I saw a few things here and there of some political angles that people had, but nothing really that I was thinking of. And even John Krasinski himself, I think, said something about some really general thing about some political connection that I was just like, I don't really personally see that much. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk about this in the way that I was thinking, because I do think it's a powerful way to think about this particular story, even though the creators themselves didn't think of it that way. So let's start again with Sapient, you just sharing your overall thoughts on the film.
In the way that the Nightbreed were hiding from people who turned out to be the monsters, the Abbotts are hiding from the monsters. And I think here there's in our minds, being human as we are, very little concern that the Abbotts might be the monsters and the scary space aliens that hunt by sound might be the good guys. I don't think that's the case in this film. I think if you were to try and make that case, you'd be a bit twisted. I think we're all rooting for the Abbotts.
Yeah.
There was so much I like about this. I mean, I saw it when it came out, and it scared the pants off me at the time. And rewatching it in the last few days, it had exactly the same thing. In fact, there were a couple of moments where I needed to pause it and go off and get a cup of tea. And I'm not quite sure how I managed to sit through it in one go at the cinema without getting very, very disturbed.
Yeah.
Again, I'd have loved to have seen the initial script read. I mean, I suppose Emily Blunt and John Krasinski knew what they were getting into, but there weren't a lot of words in this film, were there? I actually looked. The first time you hear anyone speak was at 27 minutes, and that's Emily Blunt whispering. And the first real dialogue is at 37 minutes, and the film's only an hour and 20.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it shows the incredible power of film and not necessarily dialogue.
Yes.
I loved the fact that they win through the power of Regan's disability.
Yes.
I thought I'd actually forgotten that. I think that was incredibly powerful, and that she was using the device that her dad created for her that she didn't want, to overcome the monsters. The very idea of giving birth in a bathtub where you can't say anything. That was one of those pause moments. Ooh, and then hiding the baby in a casket in underground with an oxygen mask on its face.
Oh my God.
To keep the monsters out. It's just, I mean, it's a very claustrophobic film.
Yeah.
It's very, I mean, even though it's set in cornfields and there are these beautiful vistas, the art direction I think is absolutely stunning. It's a very, very small, tight, panic-inducing film.
It is. It really is. And I had the same experience as you rewatching it. I'm like, man, how did, like, you would think, okay, you've seen a film, you kind of know what's coming. But like rewatching it, I got scared the same amount as the first time.
Yeah.
I was like, how are they going to get out of this? I'm like, it's almost like I just temporarily forgot in the terror of the moment, like what actually happens. And I'm like, no. Like when they start amping up the stakes, like one after another, right? She steps on the nail in the basement steps and then understandably makes that little noise because it hurts so much. And then goes into labor or goes into labor first and then steps on the nail and just like, it just keeps raising the stakes. And then, in the bathtub and baby's coming, doesn't care. It doesn't know anything about the monsters. I'm just like, oh my God. And there's one in there. There's a death angel in the house. And
but the other thing is it's not sort of stupid terror for the sake of it. It's apart from I wondered how there happened to be a nail sticking out of the stairs that they'd used over and over and over again for the last 480 some days.
Sure.
We'll gloss over that. The way that the horror builds, the way the tension builds feels natural. It feels like this could actually happen.
Yeah.
Which makes it much worse.
Right.
And you're constantly thinking to yourself, if this was me, how would I manage it? Would I manage it? Or would I be like the beardy old hermit in the forest who just yells when he sees other people because he hasn't had anyone to talk to for so long?
Right. And just doesn't care at that point if he hurts other people in the process because, I mean, that's not what he's trying to do, but he just loses it. He doesn't care about anything at that point.
Yeah.
No, I had this very similar experience rewatching it emotionally and artistically. But again, here we have, in a very, very vivid, powerful way, a portrayal of survival, necessary survival. And I know that especially in contemporary times, there's a lot of negative associations, understandably and rightfully, regarding the concept of silence, right? There's obviously bad kinds of silence, but there are also good kinds of silence, or even, like in this case, necessary kinds of silence. You know, we talked about Nightbreed and how hiding in a lot of situations isn't cowardice, or it isn't like, not rising to the occasion. It's a necessary step in the continuum of being able to resist and fight back later. And this is even more dramatically so where, talk about, I'm kind of a sucker for these films that remove a sense, whether it's sight. What's the one with the...
Bird Box.
Bird Box, yes.
Yeah. It made, and I was actually a bit confused coming into this as to which was A Quiet Place and which was Bird Box. But yeah, that's the one where they're canoeing with their eyes shut.
They can't open their eyes because they'll see. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. And so one could ask, okay, well, these are aliens, like how is this representing like authoritarianism or specifically fascism? I think like it's more symbolic, right? There are two kinds. So there's a kind of cosmic fascism where I feel like the Death Angels, we don't know a whole lot about their background, but I take it that if they were to land on another populated planet with a life form, they'd probably want to kill everything there too. It's like they just can't tolerate anything else, any life that makes sound. And what is life but sound, right? And so it's like they hate life itself and they can't tolerate anything existing. It's kind of like this cosmic fascism almost. But it can also be interpreted, I think, as more like a humankind, where human beings make sound figuratively and literally. And when you can't tolerate the very existence of a group of people, as we were saying with Nightbreed, that is one of the historical core components of fascist ideology, right? There's no indication that the Death Angels, as they call them, the aliens, do this for food. Like, we never see them eating anything, whether they kill animal or human. They never eat any of them. They're just killing, right?
Yeah.
And so,
No, you're right. They don't seem to eat. And it doesn't look like fun. It does look like frustration and annoyance.
yeah, like intolerance for the mere existence of these living beings. So there's a kind of a cosmic fascist aspect to it for me, and also symbolically a kind of localized human fascism as well, where, yeah, you have this community, you have this family, and they're just trying to live their lives like the Nightbreed. They want to be left alone, but the Death Angels can't tolerate that or accept that. And then you mentioned the daughter, of course, which, yeah, and one of the most powerful things about this film is the portrayal of vulnerability, but also that vulnerability as strength. So the deaf community, for example, will often talk about how, rightfully, we'll talk about how deafness is not, deaf people aren't broken. It's not something that needs to be fixed. It's another way of being, it's a legitimate way of communicating. And that is true. But also, in practical terms, and especially in this fictional world, Regan is disadvantaged in the sense that she can't hear when a death angel is making sound nearby, right? And that is a disadvantage, practically speaking. There is that kind of extra vulnerability. But what was interesting, because she knows she's vulnerable in that way, at least, she's extra careful. Like, there's this one shot of her gingerly avoiding even like the single leaf, because there's a lot of them around. It seems to be like fall. And she's walking through that one path they've laid out with sand to sort of muffle their steps. And she's just like expertly avoiding every single leaf. And it just looks like she's extra careful, like as if she is herself aware that, yes, in this one way, she is more vulnerable. But because of that, she's extra careful versus, a lot of people who probably got killed off early on, maybe were used to comfort or safety or privilege, and therefore weren't, again, symbolically, weren't careful and were detected and killed off early on versus the people who know they're vulnerable. And so they're more careful. So I felt like Regan had that symbolic aspect to her. And also her gift to her whole family is survival, in the sense that they probably wouldn't have made it without the family using ASL, American Sign Language, as an alternative form of communication that lets them talk to each other in silence.
Yeah.
It's a gift that they would not have been given if not for Regan.
No, it's a nice one. I didn't actually realize that Millicent Simmons was herself deaf until I rewatched it and looked up her biography. So, who knows what the rest of the cast would have learned through doing that.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely recognize the point about people who have different abilities is absolutely not necessarily a handicap. And in this case, it's just an amazing last scene where that monster's about to kill the entire family, and all you see is she's staring at the whiteboard, and in big green letters it says, "What is their weakness?"
Yes.
And that light bulb goes on, and she's like, "Oh, I know how to do this."
Yes.
It's lovely.
And
I tell you the other thing. Sorry.
Yes. No,
we talked in Nightbreed about militarization, the use of weapons. Emily Blunt's character has fallen back on the thing that most action films would fall back on, which is a big old gun. And it isn't a big old... I mean, all right, she shoots the thing in the head at the end when it starts getting up again, but Regan has done the damage.
Right.
And Regan has found the way to beat these monsters without using firearms. So
right.
I like that. I thought that was nice, because there's too many guns in films.
Yeah, it was. The very weapon that strikes at the weak point of the Death Angels being linked to her disability or source of vulnerability in that situation becomes her weapon and her strength. And then that was just lovely symbolism. But that sign, that little whiteboard you mentioned, that's of course like the father's setup where he has all these like newspaper clippings. And it just reminded me of, I rewatched this after I rewatched Nightbreed. And one of the newspaper clippings was something like, how to survive. Get underground. And I was like, oh, like in Midian, when the Nightbreed go underground to hide from the human monsters in that film. It was like a nice little unintentional link. So another very related thing that I wanted to talk about was, speaking of Regan and sign language, the way various kinds of oppressed or marginalized or vulnerable communities have come up with and used alternative methods of communicating with each other to evade detection from authorities or oppressive forces or those who seek to persecute them. Like, I found a lot of parallels to real life examples throughout history in all kinds of different situations with different groups of people. So like, for example, in the 19th century in the US, as part of the Underground Railroad to help people who were slaves escape, there was like a whole bunch of different coded ways of helping people out. So like there were songs, like the Black spirituals, there was like a whole encoded language within many of them that the slave owners would not notice, but that people knew to how to interpret. So like there's a song called Follow the Drinking Gourd, and it's literally instructions for how to find safe houses or where to go. It's like follow the Big Dipper, because the drinking gourd, the shape of it is like
Wow.
Big Dipper. And then there's all kinds of other coded languages. So safe houses, so people who are like allies and want to help, there were symbols to indicate safety. So obviously, even if you're a safe house, you're not necessarily going to always be safe for a variety of reasons. So if a person who was escaping was coming by, and if you put a, well, don't quote me on this, but I think it's either like a candle or a lantern. I think a lantern. Like if you display it in the window, that means it's okay, you can come. It's safe today. If it's not there, that means don't stay here today. It's not safe. And so there was like a whole system of all kinds of stuff. It's fascinating and quite beautiful, actually. And then, of course, you have other communities. I learned about this while doing some research for this episode, where there's like apparently something called Polari. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's a system of slang.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Then they pronounce it okay.
Yep.
Used by the gay community in Europe, going all the way back to like the 19th century, possibly earlier. Again, a way of communicating with each other to avoid detection. And then, of course, you have like many artists throughout history who have encoded critiques of authority within their art in seemingly innocuous ways, right? That would avoid detection, like Shakespeare, all kinds of fierce critique of royalty in his plays, like dressed up as comedy or, And I think that's partly how the genres of science fiction and horror evolved. It's like, oh, these are just, these fun vehicles for distractions and fun stories, but nothing more.
Honest. Just enjoy the ride. Nothing bad can happen. Yeah.
So that was another thing that I saw in it that I thought was a lovely, beautiful parallel.
Yeah, it tells us something about human ingenuity in the face of adversity, doesn't it? And the fact that if you give people a little bit of space and time, they will adapt in ways that might surprise.
Have you ever, even if it's just for fun, because it can just be for fun too, not necessarily because of some frightening situation, but have you ever slipped in any encoded references to anything? Or,
Yes.
I'm sure you have.
Yes, but I'm not saying what it is.
Like a good,
and
as it should be.
Well, actually, there was one song on an Abomnium album where the lyrics formed, do you call it an acrostic? Where the first letters of the lyrics, when read vertically, form something.
Oh, I don't know what it's called.
I think it's called an acrostic. Yeah, and so the original demo for that one song had an acrostic in it. I actually changed the lyrics for the album version, just in case anyone actually read it. Probably very few people would have understood it, but yeah. And I think everything else is probably allegorical, metaphorical, or blindingly obvious. I'm not sneaking backwards messages in there telling people to do strange things.
Right. On a related note about like encoded language, although this is slightly different, you remember that scene where Lee Abbott, the father, takes the son, Marcus, Marcus doesn't want to go, but he says, come on, you got to learn this. So they go to a stream to, I think, check on like a fishing trap that the dad had set up. So in the stream, the dad starts whispering, and the son's like freaking out. It's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? He's like, no. We're okay. The sound of the stream is camouflaging our whispers. So like, we're okay. And then he takes him to the waterfall, and they sort of sit behind the waterfall. Dad actually like screams. Now the son's like really freaking out. It's like, no. The louder the sound, the more our own sounds are covered up in camouflage. And he's trying to teach him that. And again, just like with the sign language and the encoded communication, I saw like a parallel here with an idea, if you'll bear with me, that I'd like to lay out this thesis. In a real world situation, in very sort of dire, oppressive, dangerous situations where you're being targeted, or even if not overtly targeted, maybe you're just vulnerable in various ways, so you're wanting to be careful. And yet at the same time, you want to say something, so to speak, figuratively, literally. Obviously not hard to unpack what I'm saying here, but so you want to say something, you do want to make noise at the same time. The symbolism of that scene for me, and that principle in that fictional world of disguise your sound with other sound, or like the fireworks they use at the end. I think if you pair the sound or noise you're making with louder sound, or you time it with louder sound, you can say what you want to say, get an important message out there in a way that's camouflaged. So I'll give a specific concrete example to clarify. So for example, let's say you want, and obviously it's really tricky times, really dangerous. People are being targeted. There's all kinds of massive surveillance online going on in ways we just hadn't seen before. And it's hard to know what's safe. What can I do that's safe? Is this going to come back to put me or my family at risk in any way? I think like there are, events that happen in the news that are quote unquote very noisy and maybe not even ultimately that meaningful or important, but they're very noisy and they get a lot of attention. So, for example, there was, of course, the very unfortunate assassination of a certain political influencer recently in the US. And that event itself is horrible and tragic. So I'm not saying that's like unimportant noise, but the noise around it on social media and the public rhetoric from like politicians or leaders trying to exploit it for their own ends and manipulate it, that was noise. And on one hand, very noisy. It gets a lot of attention and clicks and arguably, from my viewpoint, like not even that substantial, right? But if you use that, so that's getting all the attention, and you can sort of be over here, like maybe write an article or write a song or a podcast talking about important issues that you feel are the really important issues, or like building community, which is fundamental for anything you want to do. So you're doing important things, and unfortunately, it might not get as big an audience because there's all this other noise going on over here. But by the same token, you're also camouflaged from the ones who might seek to, surveil you or like flag your account or whatever because you said this critical thing about someone. But again, it's like the waterfall in the film that's covering up the father's shouting. And so I feel like that's a way where you can sort of take advantage of noise that isn't good or very important, but then it's distracting people. So you can be over here doing some really important stuff and sort of be safe. And that's just like, I'm not actually saying that's a guaranteed principle there. Like, it's just a thought, a thesis I had while watching the film that I'm actually in real life trying to explore and think about what are some ways that this can actually be practiced in a practical way.
I think the people who are unfortunately masters of this are the bad guys. Because this has long been recognised in the UK and was very well satirised in the long-running TV show Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, which, if you have never seen, I would thoroughly encourage you to go find clips on YouTube, and I'll happily share things with you because it is just a brilliant parody of how government worked. And it's maybe too UK-centric, but never mind. But the point there was you make all this noise, and while all that noise has captured people's attention, you slip out a deeply unpopular policy or decision or executive order. And I think the bad guys are tremendously good at this.
Yes.
And I think your thesis is right, but I don't know whether the opposition has really caught on.
Yes, and you make, of course, a very important and correct point as well, in which there are many in power who unfortunately are already masters at this. So it gets me thinking, okay, if they're already abusing that tactic and they're already masters at it, then maybe we at the very least should also kind of use the master's tools, so to speak, to dismantle the master's house, use their own tools against them in a sense. And then another way that I thought of, like this principle of the waterfall in the film, covering up the dad's loud sound, is pairing important messages with things that seem innocuous. So, for example, this podcast is about pop culture. Oh, it's just fun stuff. We wouldn't possibly purport to be talking about really important societal issues that impact everyone, Like, oh, look, it's just Star Wars and it's just fun stuff. And even though George Lucas from the very get-go intended to be an overtly political story and mythology, Fortunately, Andor has brought it back to that, but that's a different podcast episode. But yeah, sort of like pairing things with things that seem safer or innocuous or fun, but also contain very important issues. But the other benefit of that I have found from personal experience, and was one of the reasons why I even started Pop Mythology, is when you pair these things together, fun stuff with very important and sometimes uncomfortable stuff, it helps you get the messaging to people who might not otherwise want to listen to just the heavy stuff by itself, whether it's because of discomfort or creates anxiety or possibly lack of interest due to not really knowing about it, like whatever the reasons might be. But pairing it with this fun, movies or novels, whatever, comic books, it makes it more fun and safer and approachable. But you're sort of also inserting that important stuff. And this, I can say from personal experience over years, does work. And there's actually research on this. This is not the best example, but what's that film with The Day After Tomorrow, something about a extreme, exaggerated version of when everything freezes over, the next ice age or whatever, right?
Oh yeah, 'Tis the Day After Tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, The Day After Tomorrow. Just exaggerated, totally. It's not going to happen like that in real life. But the principle there is scientifically sound, and scientists have said that. And they found in this one study that people became interested and wanted to learn more after watching that ridiculous Hollywood movie. So this stuff does work.
It's what stories are for.
Exactly.
Of course, you just mentioned Andor, and I could talk about Andor for several weeks. So.
I could too. So let us do so.
But yeah, I think the really important point you make here is the waterfall, in a sense, is a disguise to allow the frustration out, and it was an opportunity for the dad and the kid to scream, which is something they cannot do at home, and they could just let that out, and it was safe. And in some ways, the waterfall, I thought, represented a safe environment.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like Midian, or
yes.
I don't know, a favourite bar or something, or a club, or a friend's house, or, that place where you can just go and be yourself, uninhibited, unconcerned, let it all out. That, for me, was what the waterfall meant in this film.
Yes.
I really like the idea of it also disguising, and your point about, how do we get better at disguising messages in the same way that other people do, I think is good. And the point about stories, if they're not political with a small p, what are they about? Stories are there to teach us, they're to put, right back to the beginning of our conversation, what's the purpose of horror? Horror is to make us uncomfortable, is to help us learn about what's around us in a way that we wouldn't otherwise do. And whether that's art or books or music, but every now and again you get these people complaining about, why do you have to make everything so political? It's like, well, because life is. And it's good to think about these things.
Indeed. While you were talking about safe vehicles or spaces for this kind of figurative screaming, I was actually thinking of your music where you literally scream.
Oh, I love it. Why do you think I do it? There are two things that put me in that place. One is doing vocals, and the other one's going to the gym and lifting heavy things for an hour or two.
Yeah, indeed. And also you mentioned neighborhood pub. Do you want to give a shout out to any pubs where you go and just complain about the state of the world and everybody gets it and nobody's going to flag your account for it or.
Well, when I tend to go to the pub with my wife, and we're pretty good at doing those sorts of things with each other. So
yeah, for sure. So yeah, any other thoughts that I know kind of went on for a bit about the camouflaging the noise. Is there anything else that you thought of while watching that you'd like to just riff on? And it doesn't have to be, we've talked a fair amount of the thematic stuff and the societal political messaging, but even just artistically or technically or anything like that.
I mean, the whole thing in A Quiet Place is the art direction, I think, is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I'm no student of film, and I couldn't really talk terribly knowledgeably about film, but there's something I'll recognise when the art is really good. And the big difference between the close-up shots and the long shots, the way they balance and the way that they're used to focus in on people, And the fact that there isn't dialogue, and so much of the action is carried by expression and inflection and the movement of eyes, I think it's just really well made. It's a really well made film.
Yes. So I remember back in my college years when I majored in media studies, so I was taking a number of film classes, and in one of the early ones in film theory, I remember the professor saying something about how a good film, and this was certainly widely understood and true among like the early filmmakers, because film did literally start out with the silent film medium. But even in the age of sound and dialogue, a good film should let you understand basically what's going on and the basic dynamic between the characters and all those things, even if you turn the sound off.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not hearing any of the dialogue, but just from the camera angles, from the way the shots are framed, you should understand the basic, like the beats of the film, and again, the character relationships and dynamics.
Right.
And a film like this really demonstrates that. Not entirely, because it does have the sign language and the subtitles. But yeah, I mean, how many other major Hollywood films can you think of where there's no talking for like most of the film?
Yeah, I mean, if ever anyone wants a description of what is meant by show don't tell, this film is it.
Yeah, yeah.
So nobody explains what's happened. Nobody gives the backstory. But because it's all in the background. And there's enough slow camera work at key points for you to see those newspaper clippings and to see the burnt out cars and whatever else. You know what's happened without anyone ever telling you.
Right.
Compare and contrast with Interstellar that I tried to rewatch recently and just gave up after about 45 minutes because I was just pig sick of people explaining things to me. It's like, no, just show me. I'll go away and read a cosmology textbook if I don't understand something. Just get on with doing the thing.
It would be an interesting experiment and challenge for Christopher Nolan to try to do the kind of stuff that he clearly likes doing without dialogue. It's like, okay, dude, try to pull it off.
Hey, 2001 managed it.
Well, yeah, indeed.
I mean, it was only fairly recently that I think I began to understand just what the heck was going on in 2001, and I still might be wrong.
Well, perhaps a different future episode, but I get something new each time I watch that film.
Yeah. And so prescient now in the age of AI.
So much, incredibly so.
Yeah.
So, Sapient, this has been amazingly fun. Would you be willing to come back and do this with me again?
Oh, yeah. I love chuntering on about films and art and books and stories and things. Yes, please.
Yes. Would you like to take a moment to just plug anything that you would like to plug? Please go for it.
Oh, Abomnium is my metal band. Bridge 11 is the space rock band. They're available on all your favourite streaming services, although I'd really appreciate it if nobody bothered with Spotify, because I'm trying to boycott them after Daniel Ek's experimentation with AI killer drones.
Not to mention ICE ads. Oh my God, that was kind of last straw for me.
Yeah. So, not Spotify, please. Everywhere else you can find Abomnium, you can find Bridge 11. Enjoy it. And maybe there's a new Abomnium album in the works.
Oh, please. Oh, that reminds me. Well, first, okay, 2 quick questions along that note. First, websites, please. Any specific websites or social media where people can find you?
Well, I'm not very good at social media. I have quite an active Instagram account where mostly I post pictures of cats.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the hardcore blackened death metal band posting pictures of cats.
I am currently posting little videos of Metallica covers because they're celebrating their album Load in these months and inviting fan covers. So I'm posting those, which is really good fun. There used to be an Abomnium website, but I sort of got bored of it. Abomnium's on Facebook. I'm a bit meh about Facebook these days as well.
Yeah.
And I know Instagram's owned by Meta as well, but I still like Instagram because of cat pictures. So if anybody wants to find me, that's probably the best place.
And you mentioned very exciting news, possibly a new upcoming Abomnium album. But speaking of that, when, sir, is there going to be Abomnium merch? Like if there were a t-shirt, I would wear that thing everywhere.
Well, there were 2 very limited edition runs of Abomnium merch in the past years. One run of which even I don't have anything of. This tells you how rare it is. So we'll see. We'll see what we can do. Maybe I need to set up an Etsy shop or something.
Yeah, indeed. Something to look into. And we have something. In the last episode, I closed out with the musical theme from Godzilla. And today I have another kind of cool and fun way to close this out. And you have been gracious enough to give me permission to use a snippet from one of your songs. And we have, after discussing a few potential candidates, there are a number of candidates I feel like would be suitable. But we have chosen to use the song The Machine Awakens. Could you please tell us a little bit about this song, the story behind it, and perhaps any connections to the topics, horror, obviously, that we've been talking about today?
Yeah. It's very difficult to hear the lyrics in Abomnium songs. Now, I don't know whether there's any sort of text that goes out accompanying the podcast, but if there is, I'd happily share the lyrics.
Please.
I don't remember who it was. I'm going to say it was Alistair Reynolds, but if it wasn't, I might be wrong. Wrote a story that explained the Fermi paradox of why there are no other civilizations out there. And it's because that there is I was going to say race. That might be the wrong word. There is a set of machines scattered through the cosmos that once civilizations reach a certain point, intervene and eliminate those civilizations to prevent expansion through the galaxy. Alistair Reynolds writes horror books. I mean, he's apparently a science fiction writer. I think everything he's ever written, apart from possibly the Revenger YA series, they're all horror stories. You know, in space, no one can hear you scream. Well, yeah, and the rest. So I just sort of wrote a song from the machine's point of view. It's been sitting there from before the point of recombination, which is a cosmological event, at which point the cosmic background microwave radiation became clear. No idea how these machines got there in the first seconds of the universe, but we don't worry about these things. And it's sort of a tale maybe of us, maybe of some other species, but the machine has awakened.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know.
Oh boy, I love it. Yeah, so Sapient, thank you so much for joining me today on Strange Days Here We Come. It was fabulous fun. And again, let's talk about having you come back sometime.
Yeah, thank you. It's been awesome. Thanks so much for inviting me on.